Check the used names list and write a completely new story. Names to avoid: Maya Chen, Tyler, Daniel, Priya, Nora, Ethan, Cecile, Jonah, Sloan, Lee, Brett, Adi, Isla, Marcus, Lily, Rebecca, Ruth, Danielle, Dr. Ruth, Danielle, Dr. Ruth, Okafor, Ren, Cole, Sasha, Patricia, Claire, Faye, Diane, Gemma, Owen, Catherine, Audra, Margot, Conrad, Frank, Vera, Renata, Grayson, Beverly, Tara, Hallie, Kevin, Becca, Serena, Drew, Renee, Paige, Nadia, Edwin, Callum, Josephine. New names I use: Vivienne, Nerita, Theo, husband Lena, the other woman, Jess, best friend, Aunt Miriam, family support, Hugo, lawyer. My husband threw our anniversary party without telling me he'd already decided to leave. Not physically. He was still sleeping in our bed, still answering my texts with "on my way" and "be home by 7. But somewhere between the spring we moved into our house in Columbus and the October I'm about to tell you about, he had checked out, mentally packed his bags, labeled the boxes, and started forwarding his emotional mail somewhere else. I just didn't know it yet. We'd been married 6 years. I was 31. I worked in HR at a mid-sized logistics company downtown, which meant I spent my days mediating conflicts between people who could barely stand to be in the same conference room, and somehow I couldn't see what was happening in my own kitchen. That's the thing nobody tells you. When it's your life, when you're in the middle of it, you explain everything away. You fill in the gaps with the most generous interpretation available, because the alternative is too heavy to carry while you're also trying to meet a 9 a.m. deadline. And remember to defrost chicken. So I noticed things. I noticed them and I filed them under. We're both stressed and kept moving. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was, legally at the time, had started a new position about 8 months before all of this. Senior project manager at a commercial construction firm. It was a big deal. Better title, better pay, a lot more responsibility. I was proud of him. I told him that constantly. I made dinners to celebrate the small wins. I asked questions about the projects even when my brain was fried. He started working late. That was the first thing. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. I didn't love it, but I understood it. New job pressure is real. I've seen it tear people apart in HR intake interviews. The anxiety, the overcompensation, the need to prove yourself. I gave him grace. Then came the phone. He'd always been casual about his phone before. Left it on the counter, forgot it in the car, handed it to me to Google something while he drove. Suddenly it was face down on every surface, password changed. Taken into the bathroom during dinner. I noticed. Filed it. Kept moving. The night I actually said something out loud, we were at our friend's house for a birthday dinner. 8 people around a table. Good wine, the kind of low-key Saturday that's supposed to be easy. There was a woman there I'd met once before at a work event of his, a colleague named Lena. I remembered her vaguely. Sharp dresser, very confident handshake. She was seated 2 people down from my husband, and over the course of 3 hours I watched him angle his whole body toward her, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would clock. But I am trained, professionally. Literally trained to read body language and interpersonal dynamics. And what I read was, he was aware of her in a way that had nothing to do with project timelines. He laughed differently. Not louder, just younger. Like the laugh he used when we first started dating, before comfort set in and laughter became a reflex instead of a response. On the drive home I asked, casually, "How do you know Lena again?" "She's on the Henderson project with me." "Why?" "You two seemed close." He exhaled through his nose. That exhale. I know that exhale. It's the sound of someone deciding which version of a conversation to have. "We work together, Vivian? I'm not going to be rude to people I work with." "I didn't say you were rude. I said you seemed close." "Can we not do this tonight? I'm tired." And just like that, I was the difficult one. I was the one manufacturing problems out of thin air on a perfectly nice Saturday. I apologized. Not because I meant it, but because I was tired too, and because some arguments aren't worth the 11 p.m. emotional cost. I filed it. I kept moving. 2 weeks later, he forgot to log out of his email on our shared laptop. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. Not because it would have been wrong to look, but because it genuinely wasn't intentional. I was pulling up a flight confirmation I'd forwarded to that account months ago, and his inbox was just open. Right there. The preview text on the third email down read, "Can't stop thinking about last Thursday." The sender was Lena. I sat very still for a moment. The kind of still where your body is waiting to find out if this is real before it decides how to react. I closed the laptop. I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile, because I was apparently on autopilot toward the most cliched possible response. I stood at the kitchen window and watched a neighbor's dog bark at a squirrel across the street, and I thought, okay. I didn't open the laptop again that night. I didn't say anything when my husband came home from the gym 40 minutes later. I made dinner. I ate dinner. I watched 2 episodes of a show I can't even remember now. I went to bed. And I started planning. I want to explain something about who I am because it matters for understanding what came next. I am not a dramatic person. I don't make scenes. I don't send unhinged 2 a.m. texts or slash tires or pour bleach on anything. I grew up watching my aunt, my mom's younger sister Miriam, was probably the most competent woman I have ever encountered in my life, navigate her own divorce with such precision and calm that the opposing attorney reportedly told her lawyer she was unnerving. She always said, "Don't perform your pain, use it." So I used it. The first thing I did was call my friend Jess. Not to cry. To think out loud. Jess is an accountant. She is constitutionally incapable of making emotional decisions, which is exactly what I needed. I told her what I saw. She asked 3 clarifying questions, made a sound like she was doing mental math, and then said, "Okay, before you do anything, you need to know what you're actually dealing with. One preview text isn't a case." She was right. I did not confront my husband. I did not ask questions. I became for the next 3 weeks the most pleasant, low-maintenance version of myself. I made his coffee the way he liked it. I stopped commenting on the late nights. I asked about Henderson Project with genuine sounding curiosity, because while I was doing all of that, I was also quietly doing other things. I called a family law attorney in Columbus. A woman named Hugo referred me to through a friend of Jess's who had a reputation for being methodical and unsentimental. I didn't hire him yet. I just had a consultation. I told him what I knew and what I suspected. He explained what documentation would matter and what wouldn't, what Ohio law looked like for asset division, given our situation. The house was in both names, we had joint accounts. I had been the one to remain consistently employed while my husband job hopped in his late 20s. I started quietly photographing financial documents, not taking them anywhere, just building a personal record, our joint account statements. The mortgage paperwork, his last 2 tax returns which we'd filed jointly, and I reached out to Aunt Miriam, who drove 3 hours from Cincinnati to sit at my kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon and tell me, without flinching, "The worst thing you can do right now is let him know you know, not because of revenge, because information is leverage, and the second you show your hand, you lose half of it." 61 years old, former office manager for a litigation firm, and she has never once in her life given me bad advice. I listened. 3 weeks in, something shifted. My husband started being nicer, attentive almost, complimentary in small ways, the kind of compliments that feel like a person trying to sand something smooth. He suggested we plan something for our anniversary, which was coming up in November. A dinner party, he said. Something nice, invite some people over. I said that sounded lovely. I knew what it was. I've handled enough HR cases involving people who are planning an exit to recognize the pattern. You become generous right before you leave because you're pre-managing your own guilt. You want to feel like you were good to them right at the end. You want the last memory to be a kind one, for your sake, not theirs. I smiled and said a dinner party sounded like a great idea. And then I called my attorney and told him I was ready. We set a date. The dinner party was on a Saturday. We had 11 people over. Colleagues of mine, 2 couples we've been friends with for years, his co-worker Patrick and Patrick's wife. My husband was in a genuinely good mood that night. Animated. He'd picked the wine himself and gave a little speech about the 6 years and how much they meant. I stood next to him and smiled and meant none of it, which is a sentence I couldn't have written a year ago. What he didn't know was that 3 days earlier I had officially filed the divorce petition. What he didn't know was that the process server had confirmed she would appear at his office that Monday morning. What he didn't know was that I had already spoken to our bank and, on the advice of my attorney, moved my direct deposit to a new individual account. Entirely legal, entirely documented, as our lawyer explained, because I was simply redirecting my own income, not touching joint funds. I spent that Saturday laughing at his jokes, refilling people's glasses, and plating the appetizers I'd made from scratch. Good brie, fig jam, little toasts. I was complimented on the charcuterie board twice. He had no idea. That Sunday night, after everyone left and the dishwasher was running and he was scrolling on the couch, I said I was going to stay at Jess's for a few days. Told him I needed a little space, that I was feeling overwhelmed with work. He looked mildly inconvenienced and said okay. Didn't ask what I needed. Didn't ask if I was all right. That told me everything I needed to know about whether I was making the right decision. I kissed him on the cheek. I picked up the bag I'd already packed 2 days earlier. And I left. Monday morning, from Jess's couch, I got a text from him at 9:47 a.m. What is this? Not a question mark, just those 3 words. Flat. I put my phone face down and poured myself more coffee. My attorney had advised me not to engage until we had a formal response from his side, so I didn't. I let it sit. His next message came at 10:12, Vivienne, call me right now. Then at 10:30, this is insane, we need to talk. Then silence until 2 p.m. when he apparently collected himself enough to text, I'm going to call a lawyer. I think you're making a huge mistake and I want to talk about this like adults. Like adults. I wrote that down. I still have it. I responded once that evening. My attorney's contact is below. Please direct communication there. And that was that. What followed was not clean. I want to be honest about that. Because the story where everything snaps neatly into place after the dramatic moment is not a real story. There were 3 months of negotiation. There were weeks where I cried in the car before walking into work. Because I am a human being and 6 years is 6 years regardless of how it ended. There were moments where I missed not him exactly, but the version of our life I thought we were building. But here's what also happened during those months. My aunt drove up twice more, once just to take me to brunch and tell me I look stronger than the last time. Jess built me a spreadsheet. Because of course she did, tracking my monthly expenses and projected savings on my own, so I could see in actual numbers that I was going to be fine. My attorney, who turned out to be worth every dollar, negotiated a settlement that gave me my fair share of the equity in the house, which we sold in February. Because I had maintained consistent employment and documented contributions to our joint finances meticulously, partly by instinct, partly because Aunt Miriam had told me 2 years ago as a general life principle, the process was cleaner than my husband had probably anticipated. Lena's name never came up officially. It didn't need to. Ohio is a no-fault state. But I know what I know. My husband, my ex-husband, signed the final papers on the Thursday morning in March. My attorney called me immediately after. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of my office building and I sat there for a few minutes just listening to the sound of Columbus traffic filtering in from outside. I had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Clintonville 2 months earlier. It has good windows and a small balcony where I put 2 plants that I have not killed. My friend from work, Theo, actually wait. No. Different story. My coworker Rosa, who'd gone through her own separation 2 years prior, took me to the farmer's market on my first free Saturday and made me buy flowers for my own table instead of groceries because, she said, the groceries will always be there. Buy the flowers first. I bought tulips. yellow ones. I hung my own art. I picked my own TV shows without negotiating. I slept in the middle of the bed for 3 weeks straight before I stopped thinking about it consciously, and it just became how I slept. I got promoted in April, not because of any of this. The work was already in progress, but the timing felt pointed, like something being underlined. My ex-husband texted me once in late spring, not through the attorneys, just directly from his number, the way he used to. He said he thought we'd made a mistake, that he'd been confused and self-destructive, and he didn't know what he'd been thinking, that he missed our life. I read it twice, and then I thought about the night at the dinner party, how good he'd been at performing normalcy while I was 3 days past filing a divorce petition and plating brie. I thought about like adults. I thought about that exhale in the car and the way he'd made me feel unreasonable for noticing the truth. I wrote back one sentence. I hope you find what you're looking for, and then I blocked his number, made myself a cup of tea. This time not chamomile. This time the good stuff, the loose-leaf Earl Grey Jess had bought me as a housewarming gift. And I stood at my kitchen window and watched the street below and felt, for the first time in longer than I can name, entirely like myself. Not the self that was trying to be enough, not the self that filed things away to avoid difficult conversations. The one underneath all of that, who had been waiting, patient and a little cold-eyed, for me to finally listen. She'd been there the whole time. I just needed to get quiet enough to hear her. I've thought a lot about the timeline of it all, not obsessively, not in the way where you replay every conversation and try to find the exact moment things broke. More like how you think about weather. You notice it changed, and you try to understand the pattern, so next time you're not caught outside without a coat. The thing about what my husband did isn't that it was uniquely cruel. People betray the people closest to them constantly, for reasons that are small and selfish and, in hindsight, embarrassingly ordinary. What made it land so hard was that I had been so willing to explain it away. Every exhale, every face-down phone, every "you're making this weird." I handed him generous interpretation after generous interpretation, and he used that generosity to buy himself more time. That's not me being hard on myself, it's just what happened, and understanding it clearly is the only way it becomes useful. Here's what I learned about intelligence. The practical kind. The kind that actually protects you. It's not about being suspicious. It's about being honest with yourself about what you're seeing, even when the honest answer is the inconvenient one. I am trained professionally to read people. I read my husband correctly from the beginning. The problem wasn't perception. It was that I kept overruling my own perception because I didn't want to be right. That gap between what we notice and what we allow ourselves to know is where a lot of unnecessary damage happens. Closing that gap, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you the story you'd been telling yourself about your life. That is a form of intelligence that no one really teaches, but everyone eventually has to learn. Miriam taught it to me by example. She never told me what to do. She just modeled what it looks like when a woman decides to be clear-eyed about her circumstances, instead of sentimental about them. There is a difference between being cold and being clear. She was never cold, but she was always, relentlessly, clear. I want to be that for myself going forward. The resilience part is less dramatic than it sounds in stories like this. It wasn't one big moment where I decided to be strong. It was smaller than that. It was making dinner for one and not treating it like a punishment. It was the spreadsheet Jess built me that turned abstract fear into actual numbers I could look at and plan around. It was buying yellow tulips on a Saturday because Rosa told me to, and discovering that such a small, pretty, utterly unnecessary thing could make an apartment feel like mine. Resilience is mostly just refusing to let the hardest chapter convince you there are no more pages. And the ethics of it, the right and wrong of it, I keep coming back to the dinner party. To the way my husband stood in our kitchen and gave a toast about 6 years, while I stood beside him, knowing what I knew and choosing not to perform my grief for an audience. Some people would say I should have confronted him sooner. Maybe, but I don't think the goal is always to expose things loudly. Sometimes the most ethical thing you can do is handle your own life with precision and let the consequences land where they belong, without adding theater to it. He made choices. Those choices had consequences. Not because the universe was keeping score, but because choices always have consequences. They're built into the structure of every decision, whether we see them immediately or 3 months later when a process server walks into your conference room. I filed those papers, I moved those funds, I bought those tulips. All of it was mine to do. That's what I want to carry forward, not the anger. That burns off eventually. But the clarity, the understanding that you are allowed to act on what you know, that protecting yourself is not the same as being ruthless, that leaving when leaving is the right answer, is not failure. It is sometimes the most intelligent and ethical and courageous thing you can do. I slept in the middle of the bed last night. I didn't even think about it.